Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas addresses the UN as he calls for peace in Gaza and rejects Hamas's role in governance. Denmark alerts NATO after coordinated drone attacks at its airport and considers triggering NATO Article 4. Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to 5 years in jail over a corruption case linked with the Gaddafi regime. Now, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has addressed the UN General Assembly virtually after being blocked from entering the US. He called for an end to the war in Gaza, urged humanitarian aid access, and thanked countries, including the UK and France, for recognizing Palestinian statehood. Abbas also stressed Palestinians will remain on their land, whilst rejecting any future role for Hamas in Gaza. Take a listen to what he had to say.
On behalf of the Palestinian people, I would like to express our deep appreciation and gratitude to all the countries that have recently recognized the state of Palestine and those that intend to do so soon. We call on all those who have not yet recognized the state of Palestine to do so. What Israel is doing is not just an aggression, rather a war crime and a crime against humanity, documented and monitored. It will be recorded in history books and global conscience as one of the most horrific chapters of human tragedy in the 20th and 21st centuries.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and correspondent Sara Firth, who is joining us from Washington. Sara, let's start with you. So what's the reaction to the speech by Mahmoud Abbas today, and what have people been saying?
I mean, expected, but sharply divided. You've got the US in particular, right? The fact that he was giving this speech via video link was that stark reminder of the fact that Abbas has this strained relationship with the US right now. But I think that message that he got across pretty well was that he is willing to work with America, willing to work with Trump, and willing to work with regional powers to come up with a realistic, achievable, it's hoped, post-war plan for Gaza. They were really strong words. I think, Leigh-Ann, it was the moment of the UNGA so far, listening to him deliver that address, and it sort of had that dual purpose. He was appealing to the international community to act where they failed to in the past, to stop the bloodshed, appealing to their conscience and humanity, and at the same time a warning to Hamas and to Israel that the Palestinian Authority would be looking to take back control. Now, understandably, you have had Israel react furiously to this, saying that they've been deceived before, the Foreign Ministry pushing back on his statement, and you've also had Hamas calling his remarks deeply regrettable. So you've had that pushback there, but I think it was a very striking moment, right, that he's speaking to the heart of the organisation and those gathered there, political leaders from around the world, and the UN established to be preventing the type of horrors of war that we're seeing playing out in Gaza. And he was saying, you know, not only is it a failure, not only is Israel committing war crimes and it's a genocide in Gaza, but this will be noted as one of the darkest moments in humanity's history. So it really underscored the failure of, all around of the international community to act, of Hamas's embracing of bloodshed, and of Israel's actions that he has said very bluntly were genocide.
And I do think Sara makes a good point. It was a very, very invoking speech, and she said it was actually the standout moment at the UN General Assembly. But I don't know what you think, Shane. When I have a little bit of a closer look into what he said. 9 points is what he wants to achieve and what he told the UN General Assembly. And I thought maybe they're a little bit fanciful, some of these points. There should be a complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. Yeah. He also said that Israel must stop using starvation as a weapon, the need for an imminent and permanent end to the war in Gaza. It all hinges, really, on what we hear from Israel.
Well, yeah, completely. And I think it is very telling that Netanyahu is going to be there in person. And like you said, the Palestinian leader, he wasn't allowed to get a visa in. So but I also think it was telling that there was not a massive sort of criticism of Donald Trump personally or really of the US in the speech. And it comes back to Trump then afterwards said that there's going to be some kind of deal, which is his exact words. And also when Benjamin Netanyahu, before he left, he was talking about, there might be something coming and that they can complete the war objectives. So part of me kind of thinks that maybe the reason that there wasn't a lot of criticism in the Palestinian leader speech is because maybe there is something on the table. But the problem is that is this going to be some sort of magic formula that somebody has found? Because we know that Trump has met with the Arab leaders, and apparently they're going to be offered something that they're going to be happy with. And like you said, the 9 points that the Palestinians want, and also what Israel wants. And Netanyahu said that in his speech he's going to tell our truth. And the people he's going to be speaking to, it's really a party of two, Trump and Netanyahu. Everybody else in the room is pretty much anti-Israel. There's 144 of the countries that have now recognized Palestine. And I did look up online, is there any country that supports Israel? I couldn't really find any. It did say the UK, but then the UK has recognized Palestine. So I think Netanyahu, really, this is going to be the speech that could be, the turning point, because he has to sort of outline, is there a deal coming? And I think the reason his speech will be so important, that if he's quite cordial and doesn't come out sort of warmongering, then I think that will be a strong indication that there is in fact a potential deal on the table. But if he comes out sort of all guns blazing, then I think that will be an indication that there's not really any agreement possible.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating, Sarah. We just heard Shane there speaking, and he brought up the fact that Donald Trump has said, we're close to getting some kind of deal done between Israel and Hamas, and he was talking to Turkey's leader Erdogan. What did you make of the shift in tone when it came to that discussion?
Yeah, it's been very interesting watching some of those sideline meetings happen at the UNGA, and today, of course, Turkey's President Erdogan being hosted at the White House. Very warm words and body language exchanged between the two. And it seems like the shift of tone to a more positive prospect of some kind of plan that it seems certainly the Muslim majority countries on board with. President Erdogan has been very, very outspoken about Israel's actions in Gaza, about protecting the Palestinian people. The question is going to be now, when Netanyahu is in the US, whether he goes along with the new proposal or whether he faces off President Trump, and what President Trump's response to that will be, Leigh-Ann. We know that Netanyahu has really tested some of the red lines that the US has tried to set. He's taken actions that it's not clear the level of US prior approval. I'm thinking of the strikes on Iran. There is a sense in the White House amongst President Trump's administration of a growing frustration. You had the world standing in solidarity, really, at the UN, with leader after leader recognizing Palestinian statehood. You've already had Israel come out and, very strongly worded. They've called this a shameful capitulation. But there is no doubt that Israel is looking extremely isolated on the world stage now as a direct result of its ongoing actions in Gaza. Abbas could not have been clearer. He said Palestinian people will not leave their land. You've had countries like Turkey really pushing for action and protection for the Palestinian people. And now it seems, with the meetings that have been had at the UNGA, that there is a more positive outlook. The mood music here in the US and amongst some of those gathered is hinting at some kind of possible progress here when it comes to a peace plan. It will be whether or not Trump is able to convince Netanyahu, stand up to Netanyahu, and get this moving forward. In so many times so far, we've seen this fail. Will this time be different?
Do you not think, though, I thought it was interesting what the French President Emmanuel Macron said. He was saying that the stumbling block is going to be the annexation of the West Bank. And he claimed that in his discussions with Donald Trump, that Trump agreed with him and that there would be no annexation of the West Bank. But that seems to be a fundamental criteria that Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet are insisting on. So I don't see how they're going to get over that point. And that's a fundamental contradictory from both sides.
And I think that's a really good point to make, actually, because I do think that Benjamin Netanyahu, as Sarah and you have said, how is he going to deal with what Donald Trump puts in front of him? Is he going to accept this plan that is in place, or is he going to try to keep appeasing the right of his coalition to stay in power? And I think that's one of the major questions that we've been asking the whole time during this conflict between Israel and Hamas is Bibi trying to shore up his coalition, stay in power, or is he willing to actually say, OK, fine, we've got a plan presented to us by Donald Trump and we need to follow through with that?
I think so, and I think he's energized. Like, it was only, about 2 weeks ago that missiles went into Doha, which was another sovereign country, and there was no retaliation, and nothing seems to have come from that. That was de-escalated very, very quickly. And, Steve Witkoff said that, they've met with Muslim majority neighbours, which I presume includes Qatar. And Qatar, if I remember right, went to the White House and nothing came of that. So that makes me think maybe there was something that the Qataris were told to sort of back off, and the Arab leaders were told to back off. And do you remember there was a lot of talk of the UAE saying that was a red line in terms of the Abraham Accord, and the anniversary of the Abraham Accord came and went. So I'd kind of like to be optimistic that there is a deal that is kind of imminent, and we're coming up to the anniversary of the Hamas attacks in October, so that would be a nice sort of anniversary to get in before that. But I think if there's a fundamental disagreement on what happens with the West Bank, how are you going to agree on anything?
I think it's just one of those things that I always have to say, but it's time will tell, and we'll watch out for what Benjamin Netanyahu says in his address to the UN General Assembly tomorrow, and how that address goes down, really, with the crowd. But thank you so much to both of you for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And Denmark has alerted NATO after coordinated drone attacks at its airports, and is reportedly considering triggering NATO Article 4. So, Shane, what more do we know right now about this latest incident? Right,
so this has been the second Danish airport after Copenhagen airport a couple of days ago that have seen drones over their airspace and had to close. In this case, they closed sort of last night between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m. The difference, I think, in this case is that Copenhagen was like a major commercial airline and an airport, while we're talking about it more of like a military airport. So that kind of makes you a little bit sort of more wary that is this kind of, the drones were going in to get reconnaissance on what were the defense capabilities of Denmark, which opens a whole can of worms, and we don't really want to get into too much. But the Danish Minister for Defense has come out and said that these were systematic flights, and also they were carried out by a professional actor, which is a strange term to be using. He didn't go as far as to say, it was a sovereign actor. So we don't really know yet, as far as I'm aware at this time, the cause of them. But then the issue is that there was a lot of other Danish cities where drones have been reported to the authorities, and also it comes back on the back of I think Poland, Estonia, and other NATO-led countries that have seen infractions into their airspace by sort of aircraft and drones. But I kind of thought the most interesting aspect of this is that Denmark has said that they're going to invest a lot more money in counter-drone technology, which I think that's going to be the way forward for a lot of the NATO countries, and a lot of their defence spending, which the US has insisted that they escalate the percentage of their GDP to. So if you're in sort of counter-drone defence, this is good news, I would say.
It's good news for you if you are selling drones. But what I found fascinating is, Sarah, we've obviously heard from Russia, and Russia has denied any involvement in this latest drone incursion that we have seen. But what more do we know about this?
Yes, Russia have come out and denied it. And I think it's interesting that you've had the officials in Denmark also conceding that right now they don't have the evidence that would directly point to Russia. What we do have is the context of a series of events recently where you've had other countries like Estonia and Poland having their airspace violated, tested. We know that Russia is testing these countries' air defences. It's not something completely unique having nations operate in this way and sort of push right up to the boundaries of other airspaces to find out response times, for example. There's a lot of information that can be gleaned by doing so, how quickly fighter jets are scrambled, how quickly a response happens. And in Denmark's case, it reveals weaknesses in the system depending on how they respond. So Denmark right now, and the officials have openly said this, they're going to be looking very closely at how they deal with some of those weaknesses that have been exposed by what they've called this hybrid attack. We don't know for certain whether Russia is behind this, but whoever is behind the hybrid attack has exposed those weaknesses. And as a result of that, Leigh-Ann, you've got Denmark looking to join the likes of Poland by possibly invoking NATO's Article 4. Now, that is for NATO countries to get together and hold talks when you have the territorial integrity or the security of a member state threatened. If they do that, that will be the third state, I think, third NATO member to invoke Article 4. I think Russia will be paying very close attention, whether or not they're behind this latest violation of airspace, to how NATO members handle this, how they come together, and in particular, what the US and President Trump's response will be.
And what I did find interesting is we actually heard from the National Intelligence Chief, Shane, who is from Denmark, and he said events resemble a model of hybrid warfare that we have seen elsewhere in Europe, so almost linking them to the other countries we've seen, like Estonia and Poland. And he says, we still don't know who was behind this week's drone incursions. We think risk of Russian sabotage is high. And I think one of the big questions that everyone is asking, is Russia now testing the boundaries?
Well, I think so. Like, obviously, we don't have any confirmation on this particular case, but I thought what was interesting is that the German defense minister in the UN came out and said that their space satellites had seen what he described as being shadowed by Russian satellites, and France had said something similar not so long ago as well. And then Germany's come out and said that they're going to invest like 30 billion in investing in putting more defences into their satellites. So it does, and that they put it down to the threat for Russia. So that in that case, that is a deliberate act by Germany to defend itself. So I think there is obvious cases of Russian interference similar to this. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they've been active in Denmark. And also there was a case recently where I think it was in Oslo, and the airport had to be shut down for 3 hours. So I think a lot of these are sort of just building up slowly. And I thought there was an interesting line if you remember 2 days ago when Zelensky and Trump were giving an interview, and one of the journalists asked Donald Trump if he would support if NATO allies would shoot down some Russian aircraft if they moved into their airspace. And he said, yes, I do agree with that. But I think what was particularly interesting is that he followed up the question was that would the United States then support and back up the allies taking action? And he said it depends on the circumstances. So I would deduce from that Putin is trying to figure out what are these circumstances that Trump, and where's Trump's line? And like you said earlier, what are the defense capabilities or lack of the European partners? Because Trump has always said before that the Europeans haven't been spending enough on defense, and now they are. So if they haven't been spending that much on defence before, they probably haven't got the most high-tech, up-to-date equipment. But if they want to buy that, where do you think they can buy that from?
America.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you, Sarah, but I
Right.
also, what I also find really interesting is we're talking about drones and we talk about drone warfare. And this has really come into the front because we're seeing this happening and this technology evolving so rapidly because of the war between Ukraine and Russia. And Sarah, I found it really fascinating when Zelensky addressed the UN National Assembly.
Yeah.
He was almost pitching the drone technology they have. And he was saying, you can buy it from us. We've tested it in a live war environment.
Yes, and they've not just tested it, it completely changed the game. It leveled the playing field in a way that few expected in that conflict in Ukraine. You had Russia coming in with the old school tanks, boots on the ground. Ukraine not being able to match Russia's numbers has utilized these very cheap drones as a way of targeting that older, slower machinery. And they've had incredible success with being able to hold off Russian forces in the way that they've done that. I've been on those front lines, Leigh-Ann, watched the Ukrainian forces operating. It is remarkable what they have been able to do with that technology to hold off. It's kind of modern warfare meeting the more traditional old school warfare. And Russia's approach didn't pay off. You've got huge numbers of Russian casualties, largely as a result of the drones. I think some of the statistics from various reports put it at the Russian casualties that they've suffered in the war in Ukraine. It's due something like 85% of it due to the use of drones. So they've been remarkably effective. And you saw President Zelensky underlining that. Very interestingly, America slightly behind when it comes to drone production and quality and testing it out on battlefields. You've got countries like Ukraine and Turkey who are now well advanced in their use of drones and drone technology. So it's going to be interesting to watch the space on what America does to kind of play catch up in that area. But there's no question, and I think we've discussed this before, drone technology is changing the face of warfare. It's a new era of warfare, this hybrid warfare, and drones are going to play a massive part. Just on the point, guys, of Putin, whether Russia is behind this latest drone attack in Denmark, I think regardless, their playbook, Russian playbook, is deny, deny, deny. But regardless, what we do know is that Russia has acted in the way over the last couple of years, invading sovereign territory in carrying out those actions in Ukraine. So these testing of air defences in various countries, possibly in Denmark too, it's something that NATO countries in defence circles that I'm speaking to, they are taking this extremely seriously because they know that Putin is willing to take those steps to cross those red lines in the way that he has done in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Great points there. Let's move on now. And former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to 5 years in jail over a criminal conspiracy tied to millions of euros in illicit funds from late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Sarah, well, it was quite a shock to many people. No one really expected him to get 5 years. And how did the story just unfold?
I mean, it is absolutely remarkable. It's the first in modern French history, and no one really expected such a heavy sentence. Sarkozy was known when he came onto the political scene for pledging to clean up politics. And now here he is potentially facing jail time, the court handing him this 5-year sentence and saying, crucially, that it could be enforced very, very quickly. So even if there's an appeal, he could still face time behind bars. Now, this has been going on for a number of years. You have these allegations going right back to his 2007 presidential campaign. Allegations of corruption against taking money from the Libyan leader to try and whitewash essentially some of the actions that were taking place by that country. But now you've had this culmination, years and years of allegations, the court process happening, appeals that have kept Sarkozy out of court until this point. This time, though, it seems that he probably hasn't been able to avoid ending up behind bars. And it was just remarkable watching him face down the courts, face down those reporters, you know, a very, very different figure to the Sarkozy of the past that cut that very suave, corruption battling president is now facing time behind bars for exactly what he vowed to try and stop.
And Shane, what I find really interesting is our reporter was on earlier, Ross Cullen, and I did say, why will he go to prison even if he appeals? And it's apparently because there's something called provisory execution, which means the sentence applies immediately, and then the appeal happens, which is absolutely fascinating. But Sarkozy just basically says, this is politically motivated.
Yeah, that old
They're
line,
after me. It's a witch hunt. The same sort of playbook that we've heard before.
Yeah, you always hear this from every political leader when they get caught out and then they lose their case. We've heard it multiple times, even from some sitting presidents that we won't name. But I'm probably, yeah, it's political. Everything is political. But I think there's a couple of indications to me that it's not, you know, there's no corruption going on in sort of the court system, or this is nothing to worry about in terms of the French legal system, as Sarkozy said earlier in his statement, because he was convicted in relation to what was a criminal conspiracy.
Yes.
But he was acquitted in a lot of other charges, including sort of passive corruption, which sounds remarkable, and illegal campaign financing. So it's interesting that under French law, you don't have to go and have gotten the money from Gaddafi. You just have to have attempted and suggested it. So the barometer of what, and the sort of proviso of what you can sort of do and then be convicted of it is, I would say, is quite low compared to some other countries. So, and also the fact that he could have gotten up to 10 years, but the judge only gave him 5. So I think that shows that the judge was playing by the rule book, and I don't think this is political at all, to be honest. And I think also the fact that it was to do with his close aides, and even if you've gotten, say, like there were rumour there was like 50 million or something, if you got 50 million into your campaign, you'd kind of wonder where that came from. So no, I don't think it's political, is the long answer.
So you don't think it's political, but we also have to really think about the fact that the court heard that in return for this money, Gaddafi requested diplomatic and business favours. And Sarah, we do know that Gaddafi was an infamous leader of Libya, and he had a terrible record when it came to human rights. So this is actually quite difficult for Sarkozy.
Yes, I mean, look, the French are not unused to political scandal. I'd say, in fact, of all the countries in Europe, perhaps, they probably have, amongst their public, the highest appetite for it. But this is a different level. Yes, it will be the first time that you've got, I think the first time ever that a French president would have spent time behind bars if he does face jail time. So hugely, hugely embarrassing for the country. It will be interesting to see the impact that has on Macron's popularity. You know, France has faced very turbulent political waters recently, but this certainly takes the spotlight of any of the more recent scandals. You're right, Muammar Gaddafi was accused of so many various crimes on the ground in Libya. Still today, you've got conflict in certain parts of the country, and just that legacy that he left behind, just appalling. And so the fact that you had Sarkozy, in fairness to him, one of many political leaders of that time who were seen to be cozying up to Gaddafi, cozying up to the Libyan leader, who proved with his diplomatic efforts that money talks. He did manage to break into the international community circles that he wanted to. Sarkozy was a part of that, and it seems now that those corruption charges have stuck, and he has been found guilty. I think there probably will be some other world leaders who are a little bit nervous about what's happened in this situation, in this instance with Sarkozy. But yeah, very, very embarrassing for the former French president and for the country as well right now.
And I do think when he did arrive at court today, you could clearly see the strain that he has taken through this case. But stay right there now as we move on to another story. And Chinese leader Xi Jinping has announced new commitments on the country's emission goals at the United Nations General Assembly for the first time. He's pledged to cut, not just cap, greenhouse gases with a 7 to 10% reduction. The move contrasts sharply with climate-skeptical remarks by US President Donald Trump earlier this week. Jan Kamenzen-Broomby reports from Beijing.
Appearing at the United Nations via video link, Chinese leader Xi Jinping has unveiled a whole host of new climate change-related pledges. Among those, a pledge that 30% of the domestically consumed energy in China will be coming from non-fossil fuel sources. Now, how will that be achieved? Well, it could be achieved through another pledge of his, which was to boost wind and solar production some 6 times from their levels in 2020. But the big pledge, the big takeaway from Xi's speech at the UN was this pledge to cut carbon emissions from 7 to 10%, or by 7 to 10% by 2035. Why is this a big deal? Well, it's the first time we've seen a Chinese leader pledge to cut emissions rather than just limit emissions. Xi also used the speech to suggest that despite some countries going against the trend, the international community should stay on the right track when it comes to dealing with the climate crisis. That, of course, is a thinly veiled jab towards Washington and towards the Trump administration. Trump using his own speech at the United Nations to refer to climate change as, quote, a con job. And Trump has, of course, in both of his terms as president, declared that he will withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Accord, standing in stark contrast to the words uttered by Chinese leader Xi today, who called for greater collaboration internationally and among developing countries to achieve the aims set out by the Paris Climate Accord 10 years ago.
And you know, Shane, as the reporter said there, this is just a massive turnaround for China, because I remember that COP in Paris, and it was a very different story back then.
Even COP in Dubai, there was.
Yes.
Remember they were sort of rolling back on fossil fuels, and there was a sort of interesting wording. But no, it is massive news, and I think because China is like the biggest, the world's biggest. I wouldn't go as far as say the polluter, but definitely emitter. But I'm kind of skeptical of it. I kind of think that the Chinese are saying this in sort of coming out from what Trump said before, and it's sort of poking the beast kind of thing to sort of now they're suddenly Beijing's now suddenly supporting sort of climate change when before they were very much against it. But I do also think it's interesting. I saw a lot of sort of analyst reports come out in the wake of it, and they were saying that if the US has very, very fundamentally sort of exited the energy transition, and Trump has, drill baby drill, and as your reporter said, he referred to it as a con job, and I think he referred to climate scientists as stupid. So they said this is an opportunity for China to step in. And if people want to build more sort of wind farms and solar panels, which we're doing in this part of the world, which is obviously very sort of hydrocarbon central, that's going to be a great business opportunity for China. So China's always very good at looking at following the money and the Belt and Road around the world. So I think I would be very heavily skeptical about if they're going to actually cut emissions, but I think their plan to increase green energy, I think probably has a little bit more weight, to be honest.
No, that's very interesting. They've almost found the gap in the market, and they're going to fill that where the US is stepping back. And Sarah, there are calls that climate targets must actually go further, and that this isn't enough to stop a global catastrophe. And this is all according to experts. But the climate conversation has changed a lot under Donald Trump. He called it a con job at the UN and also a green scam. So are people rolling back a little bit in general?
Yes, I mean, it's drastically changed under Trump. You've had him both times that he's served as president withdrawing from the Paris Climate agreement and issuing at the UN himself what amounted almost really to a climate denial speech. He calls it the climate con job, calling scientists stupid. It was typical Trump, not mincing his words, but clearly you've seen that rolling back of efforts to tackle climate change under the Trump administration for a second time. It has opened up the space a little bit for a leader like China potentially to step in and push the movement forward. Now, they've committed to this 7 to 10% cut to greenhouse gas emissions by 2035, I think it was. I mean, Shane probably knows a little bit more about the climate aspect of this, whether that's achievable or not. But it's an interesting stance that China has taken. Is it simply a jab at the United States, a sort of political power move? Or do they have the ability and the will here to actually implement this within the timeline that they've set themselves? Certainly, there's no question that given that you've had Trump and the US taking the stance that they have, which, as I said, essentially amounts to climate change denial in many areas, whether China is now going to step into that void that the US and President Trump have left.
I found it interesting, just a quick thought about this. Donald Trump did say it was a con job and it was a green scam. And I know his words were really strong and probably shocked a lot of people. But let's be honest, Shane, green energy is extremely expensive and it has been very difficult to implement. And I think a lot of companies have realized that. We saw banks bringing out green bonds.
Yeah.
That's largely disappeared when it comes to the big oil producers too. And I think people have realized it's all good and well talking about green bonds and climate change, but the implementation is very expensive.
It is. It's very expensive, and but I think maybe if China gets on board with it, because they have the ability to control the cost of the solar panels, because a lot of the equipment that makes the solar panels comes from China. So if they are saying that they're going to ramp up their capacity 6 times over the next 10 years. So obviously, if there's more supply and there's more demand, then that'll adjust the price. But every time we generally at AGBI look at the energy transition and renewable energies, the benchmark for pretty much every part of the world is so low.
So low.
And I think what Trump's point of view, everybody I think around the world, most countries just felt like they were then off the hook. And I remember at Expo City in Dubai, everybody was talking, and there was a lot of energy around the debate on it. But I think now that Trump's back in, everyone's like, oh, we can just forget all of that now. We can go back to getting gas and oil and coal even and nuclear and whatever we like. So I don't think the dial is really going to change that much, even with China coming on board. It might help be good for the planet if they do get it. What was it they said? Up to 30% of their domestic energy will be from renewables. If they achieve that will be great, and because like I said, they're the biggest emitter. So if China does actually cut back, even if it's just 7 to 10%, in terms of the planet as a whole, that would be massive. But I'm quite skeptical, to be honest.
But just one quick thought before I go. Wind and solar, China said that they were keen to do. And Donald Trump in his speech, we know Donald Trump hates those windmills. He always
especially the ones off his golf courses in Scotland.
Yeah, the one on this golf course in Scotland. He's not a fan. So maybe, we might hear a bit more about China's wind energy in the future. Now, it's that time of the show where Sara and Shane tell us their stories of the day. And Sara, let's start with your story. And it's about Trump's escalator gate at the UN. This has escalated, excuse the pun.
I know. There's so much you can do with this. The escalator escalation that keeps on escalating. Now President Trump coming out demanding an investigation from the UN. He calls this sinister triple sabotage, guys. So he is saying that with the teleprompter failure, with his audio issues at his speech at the UNGA, and then with that moment that we've all seen on the escalator where it stopped, the UN saying, look, it was likely actually a White House staffer, a videographer possibly, who was at the top, accidentally bumped and triggered the safety mechanism that stops people getting caught in the spikes at the end. Who knows? The UN, though, has now been tasked with, guys, on top of dealing with the current conflicts, climate crisis, everything else that is going on the world stage, they now have to get to the bottom of what exactly has happened when it comes to this Escalator incident to prevent it becoming more of an international incident. President Trump is furious.
But can I tell you something? On a personal note, when I saw him, he was clearly irritated when he got up to that podium because his teleprompter auto cue wasn't working. I mean, him and his wife were on the escalator, it stopped, and then the audio was absolutely terrible. He's also frustrated with the UN because he basically says they're not doing anything. And I thought he handled it quite well because if my teleprompter went down in my show,
I was just going to ask you, yeah.
I couldn't have riffed for an hour like Donald Trump did.
Yeah. Do you think this is basically the flip conspiracy where he's going to make such a fuss they'll go, all right, we'll just move the UN to Geneva, let's get it over done with?
Well, that is the big question. Does he want the UN to move to Geneva? Then he doesn't have to fuss about it all the time.
Exactly.
But I mean, you know, good on Donald Trump and also good on Melania. Yeah, that escalator stopped and she just carried on. She went to the top. She was pretty cool in the whole situation, I thought.
Can you imagine if that happened to Biden and he had to walk that many steps?
I can't imagine. Anyway.
It could have been so much worse.
Yeah, exactly. It could have been so much worse.
Exactly. Was it like a 70-odd-year-old man forced to walk up steps? It's a national scandal, I tell you.
It's a national scandal. But he got there in the end. And Shane, let's talk about yours. And it's all about how cows, paint and fly bites have turned out to be a winning combination. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't think I'd be saying all of that on auto cue.
No, exactly. It's still working anyway, the auto cue. So the Nobel Prizes are going to be given out in December. So in advance of these, there's a load of prizes that are giving out in the US called the IG Nobel Prizes. And what it basically is, it's genuine scientific research that is, they said it's like first makes you laugh and then it makes you think. I'm not sure it really makes you think too deeply. So there was a lot of the winners in multiple categories, but I'll give you sort of the highlights. Some of the ones that I like you said, in relation to cows, there was a researcher looked into that. If you take cows, paint them with stripes like zebras, do they get bitten less by flies? You know, big stuff we're talking about here. I love this one. There was one, if bats drink alcohol, will it affect their ability to fly? You know, again, that's a very important question. But I particularly like this one, the clumpiness of pasta and pasta sauce. What is the right sort of algorithm and sort of makeup of the pasta and the sauce to get the right one? You know, in Italy, as I'm sure you're a pasta fan as well, you'll agree with that. But this is the best one. This is a genuine scientific research that was funded. Is that what are the favorite pizza toppings of lizards? Like, this is a big question that the world needs answered. Obviously.
And I think Sarah knows the answer.
So we need the answers. The audience deserve the answers.
But Sarah, we looked at the answer, didn't we, of the lizard topping?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be some kind of insects, like crickets on pizza, but it turns out, guys, it is. I'll let Shane do the reveal. It's too good. It's too cute. Yeah,
well, I think it was the 4 cheeses, wasn't it?
The
that we looked at cheesy,
pizza.
Yeah, which, you know, the poor little lizards,
Cheesy
you know, that's
pizza.
what they like. So. But basically, I would see these as the scientific version of the Razzies ahead of the Oscars. And I found there was a Russian scientist called Andrei Gain who actually won the actual Nobel Prize for physics and then went and got the Ig Nobel. And I'm thinking, isn't that what you want on your bookshelf?
Yes.
You know, both of those prizes if you're a scientist.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit something. I never even imagined people would have time to paint a cow like a zebra.
Or who funded this research is the
I
big
know.
question. This is something that definitely, it kind of feeds into sort of Trump's one about useless academic research.
There we are, useless academic research, but always good to end the show on. Thanks to our guest. That was Shane McGinley, news editor, Arabian Gulf Business Insight, and correspondent Sara Firth, who joined us all the way from Washington. And that's all from us in W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X. G&T will be coming coming up next. Goodbye and good night.